In 2014, I thought I had it all. A loving family, a successful Army career. My business was finally taking off. Then bam, life knocked me flat on my back. I just lost my business. I was getting ready to go bankrupt. I went through an entire New Hampshire winter that year with no electricity. I had to decide right then, do I give up or do I fight back? I chose to fight. With hard work, determination, and a little bit of faith, I rebuilt from the bottom up. When American Facilities was named the fastest growing company in New Hampshire, that was something special. I built that business literally from scratch. It's incredibly difficult to be a small business owner. The basics that you learn is you become really good at dealing with failure and adversity, and not necessarily looking at it as failure, but more as a stepping stone along the path of making mission. And it goes back to being a leader at West Point, right? Like, you lead from the front. Don't ask anybody to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. Both my father and my grandfather served this country. Stormed the beaches of Normandy, fought in the Navy. It taught me to fight for what matters. Never back down and never give up. They have a saying that says, at West Point, much of the history we teach was made by the people we taught. And, we have principles in the military, selfless service. And what I see now is I see people that aren't necessarily in Congress or in positions of leadership that are there for the right reasons. They're there because it seems to fulfill a personal agenda or an agenda for a party, instead of putting the country first and the betterment of the people ahead of yourself. I think Americans are tired. They're beat down. People are struggling to make ends meet. Crime is going through the roof. And our politics, more divisive than ever. We have to start doing things differently, and to do things differently means starting now with the type of people that we run for office. That's why I felt called to service again, and it's why I'm stepping up to run for Congress. Because what I learned along the way is this: resilience isn't about just having grit. It's about having the courage to stand for what you believe. That's what we need in Washington today. Leaders who aren't afraid to make the tough calls, to bring down costs for working families, and to end the crisis on our borders. We need to bring people together to get results. So I'm asking you to join me. Together we can rebuild, re-energize, and restore America stronger than ever before. I'm Chris Bright, and I'm running for Congress.
We are live. What's up, everybody? Sorry for the confusion. We were originally going to go at 5:30. And we just decided to get the technology up at 5 and hang out, but that kind of caused some confusion. So here we are going live at 5:14, just like we planned. Let's do this. So, what's up, Ace?
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's actually we got some rain earlier. It's pretty good downpours, but we're inside today. We're not outside on the patio doing this. And today we're going to talk some foreign policy. So arguably this is one of my more deeper topics.
This is your wheelhouse.
This is kind of my wheelhouse.
You're pretty much the only one in the race that has a foreign policy background, an actual foreign policy background.
I don't know some of the lesser known candidates. I don't think that they have that, but yeah, that's probably an accurate assessment. I certainly am the only guy that's deployed, in the military, and I think a lot of my foreign policy background comes from that. Gosh, I talk about that all the time on the trail. I point to this example of my time in Bosnia, and Bosnia was interesting. Because, okay, James Wood, what would you do to resolve the war in Ukraine? Guess what? We're going to be talking about that. So stand by, James. I will absolutely come around to Ukraine. We're going to spend some time diving a little bit deeper in that. But yeah, so Bosnia was interesting because I was in this group called the 92nd Engineers back in the day, and we did construction, but a lot of times the construction work we were doing on deployments was geared towards nation building. And we did a lot of like geopolitical type of work. And so after I finished as like a platoon leader, I got pulled out and went over to Bosnia and was kind of embedded as the civil military engineer within what they called the CIMIC, the Civil Military Commission. And our job was to go around in sector and figure out what type of work and micro nation building, if you will, to help these like war-torn countries get back on track. So I saw it from a rubber meets the road type of perspective. And it's, looking back now, I'm very fortunate to have had that experience. But in the moment, as like a 24, 25-year-old kid leading soldiers and doing this kind of work, I didn't realize how impactful and how insightful and how fortunate I was to be able to see this kind of foreign policy. Of course, same with you. I mean, you did it in the war.
Yep.
And I think it does give you a unique perspective. And so when I think about foreign policy and people ask me like what I think about certain things, a lot of it is shaped by my time in the military. A lot of it is shaped by my experiences at West Point. And then, of course, just watching all of that unfold over the last 10, 15 years, I think that we are just an absolute mess. You use the term like almost bipolar in our foreign policy.
Absolutely schizophrenic.
Schizophrenic. Yeah, you say schizophrenic.
Schizophrenic foreign policy. We can't decide what we want to do. Every 2 to 4 years it changes. It changes based on politics, based on the election cycle, who's in office, who's not in office, what the base of each party thinks, where the money is going. Like, it is just, it's no set foreign policy in just in regard to who our enemies are. We should at least have something consistent. Like, we can't even agree on whether Russia is an enemy at this point. We can't agree on whether China's our biggest enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And they've literally been at war, people's war against the United States since 2014. So, I mean, like, we can't hold the line, maintain treaties or agreements. Everyone, it's just it's a disaster.
Yeah, like, we're part of NATO, which I've deployed in as part of a NATO operation. That was Kosovo.
Yeah.
And President Trump was like, our other allies aren't paying their fair share. Other people within the Republican Party don't even think we should be a part of NATO. So, yeah, it is schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. We're all over the place. I certainly, as a freshman congressman, am not going to be able to change the entire foreign policy. So we're going to share my thoughts on this, but I am absolutely objective about the fact that this is a much bigger mess. It's part of a discussion that we have to have. And I've always vowed when I decided to run in the interactions that we've had was, listen, I'll just be completely transparent. I want to share how I think, just so you know who I am and the way that I kind of look at these things. But ultimately, as an elected representative, it's not even really about what Chris Bright thinks.
Yeah.
It's about what do the folks of CD1 here in New Hampshire, and oh, by the way, to a certain extent, I mean, all of New England, just because if we flip this seat, when we flip this seat, it will be the sole Republican in the House of Representatives across all of New England. So, obviously, our loyalties lie to CD1 and then New Hampshire and obviously the United States. But this is something that I would love to take back into the district, starting in December after the elections, and we get over all the Thanksgiving and whatever that looks like. We come back in December, in January, and February, and we start talking and going to all these different town meetings that we're going to right now.
Yep.
That shouldn't stop just because we've been elected. And so we come in and we say, all right, folks, this is what I think. And we start to almost have some town halls. Tell me what you think. So, for example, James Wood, should we be in NATO? Like, that's a great question. I've got my thoughts. But as a representative, let's have a deeper discussion. So to start this thing off, that's how I'm thinking about it. Is I am going to get deep right now on like my personal beliefs, but I see this as a collaborative effort because the title that I'm running for is representative, and this should be something that is representative of the views of CD1 that best serve the people that live here. So we'll start there. With respect to foreign policy, I am not an isolationist, but I also don't believe that the United States should be going around the world meddling in every single other person's business. And I think when we commit foreign troops to some type of action and we don't know what the end state is and how to actually win, then we're setting ourselves up for failure from the beginning. And lately, it seems like the question that can be asked is not how do we win this, but how do we get out? And that's the wrong way to start any type of foreign policy initiative. So Clayton, or let's start. James asked something first. Should we be in NATO? Yes, I believe we should be in NATO. Here's why. The problems, and well, let's just take it back to a local street level. Let's just go back to the days of high school. A lot of things that you want to do. You want to play in a sports team. There's a bully in the neighborhood, whatever that looks like. Fundamentally, it's always better to tackle tough problems with your friends.
Facts.
And the world is a big, complex place. And if the United States is not going to have allies, then we are just going to be outnumbered and we're not going to be able to pursue the types of initiatives globally that will come back onto our shores and affect us.
I brought that very same issue up with Jo Jorgensen when she came through the last election cycle. You can't be an isolationist country and have an open border. You also can't have, you can't be a globalist country and close off your borders. And it's like this schizophrenic idea of looking at it, and I like using that word a lot. But the same people who don't like us being involved in NATO don't like our military expenditures and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, you have to have a bigger, badder military in order to fortify a fortress, waiting for your enemies to gain strength all the way on the march to your fortress. Because that's what's going to happen if we don't engage in the world stage. As we disengage, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran get more powerful. And by the time we do have to deal with them, we're dealing with more powerful enemies right here at our borders. It's not a tenable way of dealing with it. Not to mention it's far more complex than most people are willing to give credit for.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, so when I went into West Point, the United States at that time was the third largest army in the world. And then through early policies, which affected kind of international relations, we did this thing called BRAC, base realignment enclosures, that came out in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yep.
And we scaled down our military. And we were like, I think the 10th largest army by the time, like BRAC and the reduction of our force. And we combined bases and stuff like that. And oh, by the way, like, I have an interesting perspective on this because I went into the Army. I went into active duty in 1994.
Yep.
We were a peacetime Army, peacetime military in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
Like, things were good. We were building, my very first unit, we were building a golf course. No kidding. We're building a golf course in Fort Stewart, right outside of Savannah, Georgia, just so we can maintain readiness and put guys to work. And like, we were still training, but we were a peacetime Army.
Yeah.
The hottest thing was Bosnia and Kosovo. And at that time, I was like, I want to get involved. And I actually raised my hand and volunteered to go on that deployment to Bosnia. And then later on, our unit got mobilized and we went to Kosovo. While I was in Kosovo, 9/11 happened. So Kosovo, for me, was in 2001. So from 1994 to 2001, I got to see 7 years of peacetime military. And then obviously since then, from 2001, I was active duty from 2001 until for another 3 years in a wartime environment.
Yep.
And then I got out. I served in the reserves. I did a stint at Hanscom down here. I was a staff officer. Nothing sexy, nothing cool to talk about. But and then of course I got called back in 2000 and what was that 2021.
Yep.
Went back into a civil affairs group, which is the geopolitical arm of the Army, and served another year with them. So I've had almost equal time in a peacetime and a wartime environment. And to kind of see that transformation gives me a very unique perspective. So 10th largest army, or third largest army starting the military, 10th largest army. And then when 9/11 happens, all of a sudden the U.S. military is back at war. And we kind of steamrolled into Iraq. We moved very quickly. And then once we got into kind of that nation building and kind of those sustainment operations, we got bogged down. The enemy started hitting us with IEDs, and we just got basically stuck in Iraq, stuck in Afghanistan.
Yep.
What's the objective at this point? Was it to get Saddam Hussein? Is it to get Osama bin Laden over in Afghanistan? But then he skips around. We can't find them. So now the enemy is the Taliban. But oh, by the way, like later on, the Taliban takes control of Afghanistan. We're just like, all right, we're out. Like there was never an end state, right? Other than we're angry, we've been attacked, we're going to go in, we're going to wreck shop. And to me, that from the get-go was not the right way to do that.
Well, that was the issue. We were talking about that earlier, the whole 3-block war and stuff. And there was no exit point. There was no stated exit point. Like, we're here to do this. This is our mission. Once we've done that, we're going to leave. It was, we go in, we get rid of Saddam. Okay, now what are we trying to do? Oh, we're trying to give them elections. We're trying to stand up a new government. Now we're going to rebuild the country. But we're not really rebuilding the country. We're sort of in this holding pattern where we keep replaying the same thing. And we lost Fallujah, and we lost Ramadi, and we gained them back. And it's like, how many times are we going to go through the cycle? And that was just in Iraq. And then in Afghanistan, it was the hunting down of bin Laden. And we found them, lost them, found them, lost them, found them, lost them. And I remember even at one point, CNN had reported a leak from the White House that we had locked on to bin Laden's cell phone in a cave in Afghanistan. And they reported it live on TV, and I'm sitting here going, did you just report military intel live internationally?
That. Wow.
And then it's like, oh, we no longer can track the guy. No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, we do got a question.
Well, let me come back. Yeah, we'll get that. I saw Jason posted something too. Thanks, Jeremy. By the way, if you drop a comment in on Facebook, that's what we're seeing right now. So if you're watching on some of the other outlets, Jeremy, can you see all the different?
I can see a few, but I'll just put in ones.
All right, cool. Yeah, so you could drop a comment apparently anywhere. Jeremy can see that, and then he'll post it here for us to look at. But just to go back to start to frame my own views on foreign policy. So I think we need to, like, Julian, you mentioned nation building. Anytime nation building pops onto my radar screen as a foreign policy objective, I'm going to shut that down. Like, we don't have the capacity. And oh, by the way, I don't even know how the United States, we're in no position to go and look at other fledgling democracies right now and coach them on how to have a functional government. Like, let's call a spade a spade. Our government in and of itself is completely dysfunctional. We're fighting with each other. You know, our elections, people have lost trust in. Whether you believe that there was election fraud or not, I'm not going to open that can of worms. But the fact of the matter is that so many people are concerned about it, and that there's a fear of that. That in and of itself is something that needs to get addressed, that people need to feel comfortable in the democratic process and comfortable in the way that we conduct elections. They need to trust the elected leaders again. I heard somebody talking on the radio the other day, and they're like, what's the last great political leader that you can name in our lifetime. Like, we use the word great all the time. Like, have a great day. That was great. You know, I'm feeling great. Like, we've kind of diluted the word great. But when it comes to great American leaders,
Eisenhower?
Patton, maybe MLK, but it's been a while. It's been a while. So for us, we've got all our own problems. We've got a mental health crisis. Our economy is in shambles. We don't know how to fix our border. We're fighting with each other. Our education system is like, I don't know, 30th or 40th in the world. Like, it's not good. Our healthcare system, Americans just don't seem happy. And so for us to come around and be like, hey, we're gonna go into another democracy and we're gonna tell you how to do it, to me, that feels a little hypocritical. So I would like to see us focus more of our efforts on getting our own ship in order and managing the world. So not going and getting involved and trying to help them get a new system in place, but literally keeping an eye on the global environment and stepping in and influencing events and activities when there is a risk to further impact the United States.
Agreed.
Case in point, Ukraine. So let's address what James was asking. I think we should be in the Ukraine, not boots on the ground, not fighting an open war against Putin. But that invasion of that country is the single biggest land invasion in Europe since World War II.
Yep.
Whether we like it or not, and I think when we think about policy, either domestically or internationally, I would encourage Americans to separate this from whether you like it or whether you believe it. Because there are certain things that you just might not like. For example, we're Republicans here. I get asked all the time about Donald Trump. Donald Trump right now is polling behind in New Hampshire. We don't like that, but burying our head in the sand and pretending that's not the reality doesn't help you fix that problem.
Yeah.
So whether you like it or not, Vladimir Putin invaded a sovereign country that, yes, has issues with corruption, that is not necessarily a place where we can see actual ROI on that investment by being involved in Ukraine.
Yep.
But if that spreads, and if Vladimir Putin continues to expand his ambitions,
which aren't new and are well known.
That's exactly right. And I say this all the time. Vladimir Putin, and I've studied him, he views a war with the West as being inevitable within the next generation. And he's come out and said that. And if you believe that, he believes, why sit back and wait to get punched first? Punch in the nose if you know a fight's inevitable.
Georgia, Crimea. I mean, how many examples do we need?
Right.
And what baffles me is the amount of people who actually try to strongman his position, like he's doing some noble effort. Now I'm like, no. If we didn't have justification to be in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we didn't have justification to be in Vietnam, we don't have justification to be dealing with Ukraine and Putin. But at the same time, he made it very clear what his intentions were way back during the Obama administration.
Mm-hmm.
He knew exactly what he was going to do, and we saw him take those steps. Every time he's faced with a weak leader in the West, he takes the next step, and he just takes another slice and takes another slice.
Yeah.
But how we got here is because we had too many leaders over the course of 20, 30 years who every time there was red line in the sand, they backed off and they renegotiated.
Yeah.
And they backed off and they renegotiated. And as a basic term of drawing a red line in the sand, if I tell you don't pick up that gun as a cop and you reach for the gun, my hands are tied after that. I have to shoot.
When you draw that line, you either lose credibility or you gotta back that up.
Yeah.
So, but back to Putin, back to Ukraine. Strong ally of the United States.
Yep.
That disrupts the balance of power and stability. It impacts global economies. Like we saw that when he invaded Ukraine, American gas prices went up. grain in Europe, oil prices. Like, it impacted a lot of different things. And our European allies were like, hey, this concerns us. And so at the beginning of this chat, we said, back in the day, back on the street, you needed to have friends to deal with a bully.
Yeah.
We have called on our allies from Europe when we were threatened. The first Gulf War, 9/11. Like, we do need allies. And in Europe, when they are being threatened and the threat is imminent and real, and Ukraine had, aspirations of joining NATO, which is something else we could talk about. I'm not crazy about that, but we can certainly talk about it. The United States needed to get involved just to show Putin, show China, show North Korea, and show Iran, I believe, that, listen, we still stand for something, even if our leadership is weak in the White House. We stand for something. We're not going to allow you to invade sovereign countries. We're not going to allow you to inflict your will, run roughshod over that part of the country. Like, and so, but I'm not willing to commit American soldiers. I might have to go. My kid would have to go. Like, I think about this stuff a lot differently, because if we advocate for doing that, people that I know and love and care for deeply are going to be involved in that. And I really want to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons. Now, if it's the right reasons, I'm all in, right? But in this instance, we can hold Russia in check with money and influence. So Russia went in, their initial strategy, they sent an airborne unit in to secure the airfield. They were going to try to cut the head off.
Yep.
They failed militarily because they didn't reinforce their airborne operations with actual ground. Airborne troops were only able to hold an airfield for 72, 96 hours. So they weren't able to kind of get that initial shock and awe, cut the head off. You saw all of the corruption in the Russian army over years of different oligarchs taking, it's like, we're going to buy a tank for, $1 million, but I'm going to take 100,000 here. And by the time they actually had the money left over to buy their material, they got crappy stuff for what they were paying for it. Corruption was rampant. The leadership and the style of that old Soviet fighting, that's now the Russians, very top heavy.
Top down.
Correct. Top heavy. They don't push
small unit leadership.
They don't push it down. So we saw a lot of flaws in the Russian military and the way that they would fight us as a result of how they attacked Ukraine.
Yep.
The money that we put in, and this is a big one, everyone's like, we're spending all this money, we're giving all this money over to Ukraine. We're not flying over crates of millions of dollars of gold bars or cash. Like, that's not what's happening.
People just assume that's what's happening
Right.
because of what happened under Obama. And they're like, oh my God, Biden
Yeah.
is just as bad as Obama, so they must just be dropping off pallets of cash.
Yeah, he's not over there with a big publisher clearinghouse check, shaking Zelensky's hand, with this massive check. What they're doing is they're replenishing old military material. So we're taking our old stuff and we're sending it to Poland and other countries. And there's all this kind of multi-layered deals going on. And then either those countries are passing it through, we're giving it directly to Ukraine. So by all accounts, and there's no exact number, so I'm going to say anywhere from like 70 to 80%, maybe even 85% of the money that's spent on Ukraine is actually spent here in the United States.
Yep.
It's spent on our defense industries that are producing new material for the United States. So we're replenishing our stockpiles, taking our old stuff that has shelf lives and shipping it over to Russia. We are degrading the Russian military capability. So military strategists say that Russia's 2 years now in Ukraine has set them back 5 years.
Yeah.
Russia is in no position to do something else like this for at least 5 years after whenever this comes to an end. They're crippled. And I would much rather spend American dollars than American blood to hold one of our biggest adversaries in check. And I do believe that they're an adversary. Like, we can be friendly with them, but I don't trust Vladimir Putin.
This also showed Russia's weaknesses, which is also sort of held off some of their allyship with China.
Yeah,
Because, like, Xi Jinping He wants a strong partner. And what's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now is sort of showing. It's obviously showed us his weaknesses. It showed G his weaknesses as well. So I mean, it echoed everything that happens in the world in foreign policy at a international level. It does echo on to all the other issues and all the other big baddies.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely. And one more thing I'll do on Ukraine. You know, the other thing we saw in this war was like the use of drone warfare, and you know there was everything from aerial drones, seaborne drones. So the U.S. sat back and watched the latest way of how one of our biggest adversaries is going to engage in open combat, and so we're planning on that. And so for me, Ukraine was one of those situations that we had to get involved and manage it somehow.
Yeah.
I don't want to commit U.S. troops. I don't want to just be writing blank checks to these guys, but we're not. We're kind of managing the resources that we're giving them. And I also don't want to see, like, I want to know what's the end state here.
Yeah.
And so those are my those are my thoughts with respect to Ukraine. I saw a comment. What about the hostages in Russia? We talked about this. I don't know. Someone asked me about this on an event over the last 10 days. As an American, I'm comforted knowing that the government was out there working on behalf of imprisoned citizens across, the world that have been just taken and kind of used for ransom. So this hostage taking diplomacy makes me nervous. And I think that having a weak leader like Joe Biden in the White House opens up that opportunity. If you have somebody strong in there that's just, they're not going to stand for something like that, then countries are going to be a little bit more hesitant to take Americans hostage. I don't think that those people were taken hostage if someone like Donald Trump's there. Like he was aggressive. In their eyes, he was unpredictable. They didn't know how he was going to respond. They just weren't willing to go there.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one because I'm glad we got those Americans back. But I also think about the longer term implications of when we now start going around the world and trying to find other hostages that we can pull together. So we can go back to Vladimir Putin and say, are these enough people for you to release our folks? That to me is a bad look. And I would like to see us come up with a better way to get our folks back rather than looking weak and looking like we had to almost go around with hat in hand and come to Putin with enough people to get that done.
Agreed.
Let's see. What else do we have here? What is your view? This is a longer. Let me go back. So that's a longer question. We can support the head of the national business program. Let's come to us. Let me give some thought to that. Let's go back up to the questions. I saw another one in there. How do we continue to push European countries to pay their membership? It seems like NATO is unbalanced with so much money coming from the U.S. Yeah, that's a good question. Donald Trump hit on this, and I agree with Donald Trump that if we are going to be obligated that any country within NATO gets attacked, the United States is going to come to their aid. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great pact to have during the Cold War, as it was kind of Russia versus the United States, and both sides were building, kind of coalitions, and that's lasted for 50, 60, 70 years.
Right.
Where we're at now, I still think there is a need for NATO because a lot of these issues around the globe, I mean, we know that Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran have all formed some kind of cooperation, maybe short of treaties, but they're working together.
Yeah.
And the world is just too big for us to go at it alone.
Yeah.
So I think the value proposition of NATO is still valid, but they have to hold up their end of the bargain.
Agreed.
So if we are going to be required to, have a certain portion of our GDP, what are we, 3%?
Yeah.
And other countries, don't quote me on that. So I'm sure some NATO like PhD is out there like, it's 2.8%, whatever it
I
is.
believe it's 2%.
Something like that. But we're higher than other countries. But if those other countries aren't holding up their obligations, then to me, we need to use diplomacy and we need to have conversations with those guys. A lot of the folks in NATO are very, very strong allies. Admittedly, some of the fringe countries of NATO, like let's say Turkey, not necessarily as strong of a U.S. ally anymore. And I think we should probably go out and look at those countries and decide if we even want to still have them in, if they're not going to be advocating and on board with the same kind of policies that the United States has.
Honestly, Turkey, I think the only allyship we've really had with Turkey recently is when it came to the Middle East, Iraq, and Afghanistan, as far as staging grounds and traveling in and out of Kuwait and stuff like that. So, I mean, but yeah, any negotiation, any agreement where we're not getting something out of it, we should really be looking at, especially anyone who's trying to take advantage of the U.S.'s weakness.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we've talked a lot about that. So let's go to this cigar.
Cigar?
Yeah, the Mark. Let's read that real quick. What would you do to prevent? Okay, so here's a question. What would you do to prevent taxpayer dollars going to countries supporting or turning a blind eye on terrorism? Also, what are your views that Al-Qaeda, TTP, and other groups going back to Afghanistan? Would you support the head of the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan speaking before Congress? Thanks, Mark. That is a ton of questions. Let's jump into it. Taxpayer dollars going to countries supporting or turning to the Taliban. To me, absolutely not. Any of our dollars that we work hard for that go into this pot of money for the U.S., if it's going to people who are going to turn around and use it against us, to me, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Pull that away and stop it. The problem with that, and just so I can be completely, objective on this, is I do recognize that sometimes those waters get muddied. For example, Middle East. So
everybody is an enemy, and half of them are also allies at the same time.
Right, like Saudi Arabia, and they were having some guys killed and this and that. I mean, the way that they conduct their own business can look like terrorism. It can look like it's, and at the same time, we were hyper dependent on them 10 years ago on their oil. Yeah. And so you're trying to balance the US's domestic needs and the economy with these international players who are doing their own thing that we might not agree with. So I think you're just always having to make these tough choices where you have to weigh, basically the ROI, the pros and cons, call it what you want. And so if it's blatant, then it's black and white, and we're sending money to these countries and we know they're turning around and they're using it against us. Absolutely not. But foreign policy is like playing 4-dimensional chess.
Yes, it is.
And whack-a-mole and all those things at the exact same time. So you're constantly massaging and juggling and trying to manage the world in a way that protects your best interests, and it's not always black and white. It's not always a 1-to-1 trade-off. So that's my answer to that, Mark. I'm sure that's not as definitive as maybe you would like, but that's that. With respect to anybody coming to speak before Congress, I don't have a problem. Even Putin. This is where people are going to jump all over me. But even Putin coming and talk, I don't see anything wrong with other points of view coming and sharing that. In fact, the art of war, Sun Tzu, know your enemy.
Yeah.
Know your enemy. Having dialogue, having engagement with these. Okay, get down. Astro's come to say hello. Having engagement with these types of folks, there's nothing wrong with that. the more we can understand them, the more we can know how they think, what their needs are, we can either keep them in check or, in a very idealistic world, maybe there's even some common ground. Maybe there's a way to get Iran to back off of a nuclear program without actually having to go to war with them. Maybe there's a way to keep China from invading Taiwan without actually having to use military force. So I'm always open to folks coming and speaking and sharing their views. Don't worry, I'm not going to just automatically believe them now just because they're talking to me.
Yeah.
So smart people that are able to stand up and have a backbone and think for themselves, make their own decisions, bring it. I'll listen to anybody.
Yeah.
Anybody. Because if you're willing to share how you think, what you want, there might be a creative solution in there. And at the very worst case, at least I know who you are. You've looked me in the eyes and you've told me, and I don't agree with it, but at least now I know.
I think the only real concern to him speaking in front of Congress is we already pulled out of Afghanistan. I think the reason why Biden blacklisted him is because if he speaks in front of Congress, obviously the pull out of Afghanistan is going to become a topic of discussion, and it's going to be another black eye on the administration right ahead of an election cycle. So, of course, you blacklist the guy that's about to destroy your re-election campaign. And not to mention, nobody's really won a war in Afghanistan, like ever. So it's not going to, there's really no upside of putting troops on the ground there again. And that's exactly what's going to get asked for. Either that or it's going to be big fat checks. And to what end do we get big fat checks?
Let's talk about big fat checks. And let's talk about, I see something coming in from Zada. What's your stance on, illegal immigration? Big fat checks and illegal immigration and foreign policy. How do we tie that all together? Well, Mexico, Colombia, Honduras, and Guatemala. Last year, the United States collectively across those 4 countries, we gave $762 million in foreign aid. And
President Trump just talked about that.
Well, he has. Yeah. He has. I've been saying this for like a year now.
He stole your position.
Listen, I'm not ready to say Donald Trump is stealing Chris Bright's policy ideas because I'm sure he's got more people than he can count. But we have definitely been saying that. So we came up with that kind of policy idea independently and earlier than Donald Trump started talking about.
And Corey Lewandowski just went back on the campaign, and he happens to live just a few miles that way. So, and he pays attention to everything in New Hampshire. I'm just saying.
You're just saying?
Connecting dots.
All right, you're connecting dots. I'll let you be the one to connect the dots. But you're welcome, Donald Trump, for that policy idea. That came right from this living room. But no, I mean, like I said, I've been looking at this, and I think we use foreign policy as a way to shape, the global landscape in a way that's most advantageous to the United States. Yeah. So that's a situation. Look, maybe there's starvation, or there was an earthquake, or something happens, and we want to go and we want to help those people because they're a good ally to us, and we're going to send them money. That's a separate conversation whether we should be doing that or not. But if we are going to do that, then that money, just like when they come into Derry, New Hampshire, and they're like, hey, we're going to give you federal money for school lunches, it always comes with strings attached. Why doesn't it come with strings attached when we give that money to other foreign countries? So for me, if I'm writing a check to Guatemala, I'm going to hand it to them, and right before they take it, I'm going to say, hey, but I need you to keep illegal immigrants from traversing your country to come into to the United States. Help us with our immigration issues, and we will continue to support you. So I think immigration, and we talked about that to Fireside chats ago. We spent a lot of time on immigration, how to fix it, what we could do. But there are foreign policy, international relations type of levers that we can pull with respect to our illegal immigration that will help us curb that crisis literally on day one of a Trump presidency.
That's essentially what he did with the Remain in Mexico policy. Right? in leveraging what Mexico needed in regard to aid and trade and stuff to get them to to stem the tide of legal immigration coming into the country.
I'm arguing just back that off. They shouldn't even get into Mexico.
Agreed.
And then, oh, by the way, to that point, it should also be not only remain in Mexico, but remain in Canada, because we know that the Canadian immigration policies, if someone comes into Canada and says they're coming into the United States, they allow them to kind of traverse through Canada. People were making their way into Montreal and then hoofing it across the northern border. So I have made a point on the campaign trail to say it's not only remain in Mexico, but it's remain in Canada.
Agreed.
Iran moderates and common citizens under age 30 are more likely to be moderates in Western influence. Great comment, James. When I was in Bosnia, when I was in Kosovo, we kind of knew that you weren't going to change some of that older, thinking. And so when we were trying to address the fighting between the Albanians and Serbs, we spent a disproportionate amount of time targeting and working with people under the age of 30. And so I absolutely agree with what you're saying, that they're more moderate. They're, the Western influence, they're on TikTok. They're able to see some of our social media, and they're more open to our way of life. And so that's an opportunity where if we can look at the citizens of these countries and influence them without openly engaging with their leadership, who might think very differently, like to your point in Iran. I mean, the government and the leadership of Iran still hates us. They still have the Death to America Day.
Yeah.
But I know a handful of Iranians. I went to MIT. I went to grad school with at least two that I could think of.
Yeah.
That were great people.
Met a few when I was active duty. Went to college with quite a few.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great point, that it's not necessarily the people of these countries that we have ideological differences with. It's our government and their government that has a different, just like Radio Free Europe. That's exactly right. It's the modern version of Radio Free Europe. So maybe one of the only things I like about social media, because I hate social media, but maybe that is a good point.
I just hate the deleterious effect it's had on people's minds now we process information.
Yeah.
Here's this from Zaza. Most Arab countries do come through Canada. That is true.
Yep, they're right about that. Have any of the GOP committees asked you if you will sign the UN withdrawal pledge? No, I haven't been approached. I don't think we should withdraw from the UN, though. I know that's another kind of faction in our party, and people have spoken about their disdain for the UN. I'll draw on like what I just said earlier. There always needs to be a forum for countries to come together, talk, hash out issues, find common ground, solve our problems without actually, going to war. I will never sign up, though, for putting the United States or United States military under a UN command.
Agreed.
I will never subject the United States to any of like the UN's like binding, you have to do this, you have to, any type of binding resolution.
Like the UN Small Arms Treaty that Obama tried to sign.
Those types of things. Yeah. So I like the UN as a forum for the United States to come and kind of exert its global leadership and influence, but I will never put our citizens or our government underneath a global body.
Yeah, it's good to have partnerships. It's not good to sacrifice your sovereignty.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, I have lots of issues with the UN. Like, it's hard to take them seriously when damn near every country on the UN Human Rights Council are the biggest violators of human rights in the world. Yeah. Like, that is just a joke to me.
And then, and same point, like when we talk about the environment and, these like global environmental conferences or, resolutions that they try to put out. Like, look, I mean, I want to breathe in clean water and I want to swim in clean water just like everybody else. But we can't cripple our economy and do it by ourselves if China's going to blow it off.
Yeah.
And be the single biggest polluter, India. Right. So we need to kind of exert influence and leadership and try to get these people to come on board and do this. And that's where places like the UN can be helpful.
Yeah.
But we're not going to be like, yeah, let's sign off on this UN pledge and reduce carbon emissions, and then we go back and we just cripple the economy or drive everybody's heating and oil prices up for the next 5 years of winter. While China's like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Well, the other thing is like, there's no pragmatism in these compacts. Like, oh, we want everyone by 2050 to be in electric cars. Okay, where's the grid, the infrastructure, and the ability to generate enough energy to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Because gas engines right now are still the way to get around for the vast majority of places, and batteries don't do that well in cold weather. I mean, I remember we got -5, -7 degrees up here, and I don't mean below freezing, I mean below zero. And you see Teslas on the side of the road, and I'm like, oh, look, thank God I got a gas car. Just driving on by in my truck.
Yeah.
And you're not being green if you're not including nuclear. And right now there's this whole push towards solar and wind, which are the least reliable green energies, and nuclear is the most reliable, but it has the biggest fear factor behind it.
Yeah, sure does.
So
maybe energy could be something we come back and talk about in the next couple of weeks. But anyway, we are just about to the 1 hour mark now. Let's see. Any other questions we haven't answered before we start to wrap this up?
I think we got just about everything. Oh, we missed this one. Do you support federal grants and funding to aid projects like Wounded Warriors that benefit our servicemen and women?
Federal grants. Look, I'm a veteran. I am a disabled veteran. I am 60% disabled with the VA. We got some good comments too. So, but there are a lot of my friends that are disabled. One of my platoon sergeants lost his leg. I absolutely am empathetic, and I couldn't be more proud and grateful and in awe of these veterans out there that have paid the ultimate sacrifice. I lost 19 classmates at West Point, and I know just numerous people that have come back permanently injured. But I think places like Wounded Warriors and all these other organizations, I think that's better left to the private sector to donate, because we already have the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Yep.
And so I would not advocate for taking more money and starting to funnel it to these different charitable organizations. I sat on the board for the Red Sox Foundation's home base program that worked with folks for PTSD and TBI. My mom, for a long time, was part of the Armed Services YMCA. Was one of the directors. West Point classmate of mine is the national director of the Paralyzed Veterans of America. A Naval Academy buddy of mine sat on the Operation Hat Trick board. Across the board, I have friends and very close colleagues at all these different organizations. What I would like to see is those organizations talk more and maybe combine some efforts, because I do think that there's a little bit of healthy competition. Everybody's trying to get funding in the door. And then from a federal side, I would like to see our VA healthcare system just continue to improve.
I'd like to see more accountability within the VA as well.
There's a lot of ways. So I think I do think the VA is getting better. I am a patient of the VA system myself. I'm 100% in the VA. Like I don't go private. My treatment isn't the best in the world. I will tell you that, but it is getting better. And I will tell you that the people that work within the VA healthcare system, they genuinely want to deliver the best kind of care that they can. And we've moved to a model of community care, and it's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
It still needs to get better. I broke my wrist about a year ago. By the time I got an appointment, the wrist had healed. So we're certainly not there yet, but I would like to see us improve our existing facilities and system, i.e. the VA, and leave things like Wounded Warriors and all these other kind of amazing service organizations, but leave that to the private market and leave that to folks that want to, continue to support above and beyond what the government does.
I just don't. Private organizations have the ability and leeway to do what they need to do in order to get the job done. And every time you accept money from the federal government, it comes with strings attached.
Sure does.
VA or TRICARE.
Well, listen, we are an hour in, so we will start to wrap this up. We broke a new record today. We're at right now 214 people that are currently watching. So I love that you guys are tuning in. I love that we have the opportunity to just share. The entire campaign has just been about full transparency. I have my own thoughts on this. Again, all of this stuff is just Chris Bright. I actually see my role as being a facilitator of ideas. And when we win this thing, to come back and just come back to the district and say, hey, folks, there's a lot of smart people out there. Let's get smart on all these different issues. Let's figure out what we want to prioritize to get to work on. And then let's go about systematically starting to address 1 or 2 or 3 issues that we can make an impact on right now. We are now less than 1 month away from the September 10th primary, and it's going to be a tough fight. There was an article that just came out. People, was it WMUR? I forget where it is. Don't quote me on this, but.
There's a New Hampshire Journal, the one that said there wasn't a front runner.
There wasn't a front runner.
Yeah.
So it's still anybody's race. And I love the way that we're trending. We should actually posted that, but that handout from the other day.
Yeah.
But our metrics right now, we feel as a campaign that we are playing our best football going into the playoffs. I'm tired. You're tired. You're tired. We're all banged up. We've been all over the state doing so many different events, but we're generating a ton of momentum. And so everybody wants a political outsider. They want a candidate, that's like them. That is who I am. But my Achilles is that we still have to get that name recognition. We have to make every single day, every single hour count. So what I would ask you all for tuning in and listening, please help promote us. Please help get our messaging out there. Even sharing Facebook links and posts that we do is incredibly helpful. Advocating. And in these last 3.5 weeks, we need volunteers to help us, like sign wave, people to help us just get signs out, people that are willing on primary day to come to vote polling stations. There's a lot of just like manual and heavy lifting work that we could use your help on. Also, campaign funds are critical at this point. We are at the stage where advertising needs to go out. It's very expensive, and we really need to get our message out across the district. So if you would visit my webpage, chrisbright.org, Ace is posting this right now. Get on there. We've got our issues. We've got the videos that we've been pushing out. And most importantly, we have a link where you can either get involved or you can donate to the campaign, and every last bit helps. So this has been yet another great chat. I appreciate all of these comments. Again, we set a record. We are now up to 219. We have never had this many people. The amount of momentum that we are generating at this point is exciting. We can pull this off. So it's going to take all of us pulling together, deciding that we are taking this country back. It's not for the career politicians. It's not for the swampy pay-to-play people. It's for everyday Americans who are just frustrated with the dysfunction, frustrated that it just seems the entire world is on fire. We can't get out of our way, and we just want to take the country back. And that's what we stand for. That's what we want to get done. That's what we're going to make mission on. So thank you all. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week, and we will see you out on the trail.